Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Are flaky tests slowing your Kubernetes deployments? TestCube powers continuous, cloud-native testing directly inside your Kubernetes clusters. Seamlessly integrate your existing testing tools, scale effortlessly, and release software faster and safer than ever. Stop chasing bugs in production. Start preventing them with TestCube. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We continue to move along into fall of 2025, and weather's getting nicer. Weather is starting to give us some cool nights and cool mornings, and leaves are starting to change and all those wonderful things that we get in the fall. So hope everybody's doing well. Want to dive into a little bit. So one of the things that Aaron and I have been going through with the Cloudcast, obviously, and obviously if you've been listening for a little while here, you know that, while we, for a very long time had always been covering kind of very cloud topics, sort of the evolution of public cloud and private cloud and hybrid cloud and kind of all cloud things in between, the things that the industry kind of would classify as cloud or cloud computing and the technologies within it and so forth. These days it's been a little more difficult to sort of focus on a lot of cloud things, only not because it's not an interesting space, but really more because a lot of what's gone on and what goes on in cloud that we had covered for the last 14, 15 years had kind of become established, right? Had kind of, the technologies that sort of, matured, the capabilities in terms of, how people consumed it and what they were doing to use it for business use case, all those sort of things had kind of matured. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, pretty much everything that we do in the technology space at some point has to be built on something that is relatively mature so that the things that are new can take some risk, but we don't have to worry about sort of all the layers of the stack kind of falling and crumbling underneath it, right? So, we do like when there are foundational things that we build upon. Again, if we were to go back and say, hey, it's the beginning of when we did the Cloudcast. I mean, we had things like Ethernet and wide area networks and TCP/IP, and we understood how firewalls worked, and Linux and Unix and all those sort of things were pretty foundational technologies. We understood how they worked. There was wide dissemination of them. They were very stable, all those things. And then cloud started doing new stuff, right? And, so one of the things that we struggle with a little bit, as we're doing more and more on AI is just, what are the cloud things we should continue to talk about? And this past couple of weeks, Oracle and Oracle Cloud has jumped back into the conversation, which is an interesting thing because it's not something we had spent a lot of time on for the first 13, 14 years of the show. I mean, we've had the folks from Oracle on a couple of times, and them coming kind of back into the picture with some announcements they made, was sort of interesting to look at, interesting to explore. And so I thought what we do is sort of explore a little bit of that coming up right after the break. We know that AI helps us work faster and more efficiently, but what if it could also help us live longer, healthier lives? We want to introduce you to Interconnected, a fascinating new podcast about the tech behind the tech. This week, they dive into the revolution that AI is bringing to medicine. In Episode 2, world-renowned cardiologist Dr. Eric Topol and decentralized pioneer Jim Nasser explain how AI is enhancing disease prevention, supercharging personalized care, and giving patients control of their data. Listen to Interconnected today, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we have never really covered a lot of Oracle Cloud in particular on this show. And it's not been for, sort of bias against Oracle. Oracle is, a very, 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 very strong company. In terms of the top 5 or 6 company technologies that are widely deployed all around the world, Oracle technology, especially in the enterprise, in governments, in all sorts of things, very foundational, especially the Oracle database, but also, a ton of the Oracle, sort of technology suites on top of the database are, people interact with that technology, whether they know it or not, multiple times a day. And, so as they kind of, as the cloud market evolved, Oracle was, a company who, had the possibility of breaking out, when original cloud computing got started and Amazon got started, the same way that people said, well, why didn't HP or IBM or VMware or Cisco or anybody, kind of that, huge vendor ilk at the time, why didn't they become the next AWS, right? Why didn't they become the next Azure, if you will, right? And the thing about it was Oracle Cloud, for one thing, took sort of a different approach. Their approach to cloud was, because people tend, companies tend to sort of go where they know, if you will, right? Go to play to their strengths, if you will. And so, Oracle's foray into cloud, at least early on, and for a while, was very much up the stack, right? So they whether it was an Oracle delivered service or they acquired somebody and they turned that into a service, they had a very strong business in a number of SaaS services. And the simplest way to sort of explain it was, take the things that in some cases Oracle was helping deliver for companies on premises, their ERP systems, their CRM systems, their HRM systems, all those types of things, their financials. And they were turning them into SaaS services, and they were doing very well at that. And their numbers were fine. They were, the thing about it was, it felt in some cases sort of like replacement type of growth, right? So, they were able to take a service that ran on premises that they were selling licenses for and turn that into a SaaS service for many cases, the same sorts of customers. And so it didn't necessarily draw the same excitement from the market that, Amazon was doing. And, they were in many cases talking about, well, the same technologies that we're using here today on premises is the same technologies we're going to use on, in the public cloud. And while, consistency is a, very highly desired thing by many companies, especially large enterprises and governments and other things, it didn't have the sort of, new that gets the market's attention, if you will. And so Oracle continued to do that, and then they sort of went down a period of time in which they wanted to try and be in the infrastructure as a service space, or even like the platform as a service space, sort of get below their core business was, because they were watching Amazon Web Services do extremely well. The market was rewarding them. They were rewarding Amazon. Azure was starting to grow in that space. Even Google Cloud was starting to grow in that space. And I think as a company, Oracle was going, we think our influence and buying power with our largest customers is starting to erode because they are starting to, use or believe more in an AWS or an Azure or a Google or something else. And in some cases that involved database technology and it involved, BI technology, right? So, Redshift at AWS or, them having a number of SQL type of offerings. And so you saw Oracle over time begin to offer an infrastructure as a service play. So essentially, they were like, we are going to mimic and then try and Oracleify a infrastructure as a service offering, right? And so you saw OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, evolve. And when you are trying to catch up to an industry leader and you're trying to follow their playbook, it becomes very difficult to convince the market that what you're doing is somehow better. Right, because a precedent's been established, something's in place, people can touch it and feel it, and you're just sort of showing them slides of like, well, this is what we're going to do, and then you begin to put some things out there, and even though Oracle is a very very large company with very very large resources, again they got started 5, 6, 7 years too late, or later than an Amazon or an Azure, and so everything they were putting out there always looked smaller, looked less capable, right, and so, from a Cloudcast perspective, while we had Oracle on a couple of times, and I'll put some links in the show notes, I'll go back and find them and so forth. Every time we would talk to them about OCI, it always felt sort of lacking, right? It wasn't that they didn't have smart people. They hired a number of very smart people. In fact, they hired a number of Azure, of AWS people and Azure people and Google people to help them build the things. But again, when you are so many numbers of years behind somebody else, it always feels like the thing that you're putting out there is just lesser. And so, from what did our audience want to hear? We weren't getting a whole bunch of requests for people going, please, please, please talk about the Oracle Cloud, right? We weren't necessarily seeing, interesting new innovative companies building on the Oracle Cloud for a number of years. And so we just didn't spend a lot of time talking about them. And again, it wasn't a biased against them. It was where is the market going? What is the market talking about? Where is there interesting new innovation that's new and different? And that wasn't necessarily what Oracle was doing. Now, fast forward to today, fast forward to 2025, actually fast forward to like 2020-ish. And what we began to start seeing was Oracle figured out, amongst a number of people, but Oracle figured out that one of the biggest pain points that companies had, especially in working with AWS, was they were frustrated and upset about the cost of networking services, right? AWS famously charges huge premiums for their networking services. And again, this isn't a biased comment. I'll put some links in the show notes. Their pricing for networking is hugely marked up versus a lot of other competitors, and we've seen a number of companies and a number of sort of consortiums of companies start to say, "Hey, we need to sort of fight back against this because there are opportunities to better serve the market in ways that are more cost effective, but B, people like Oracle started to realize, hey, maybe that is a beginning point for us to start to have a differentiation, because just having compute services and storage services and database service isn't making it in terms of a differentiation. And so one of the things, really two of the things that they started to look at, and again, this goes back to probably 19 or 20, maybe 21, somewhere in that roughly COVID timeframe. It didn't have anything to do with COVID, but just that was around the same timeframe. They started being very, very vocal about their focus on delivering bare metal services and lower cost networking services, and trying to say, hey, if those characteristics are really important to what you're trying to do, maybe more so than the broadest characteristics that AWS offers, we should be an alternative that you should consider. And sort of famously, they became well known again around the COVID time, and also around the time when TikTok was starting to take off, and we were starting to hear, oh well, there was some larger applications, some things that people have heard of are moving to the Oracle Cloud, and the reason they're moving there is because Oracle cut them a great deal for things that required or could benefit from like bare metal services. So, stuff that needed to take advantage of the hardware more efficiently than just using virtualization. And they were doing it in a way in which bandwidth costs were coming down. And again, we got into things like COVID, where more things were moving to the cloud because they had to move out of data centers because of people movements and all that sort of stuff. This became a characteristic that was beneficial, was differentiated in the market, was something that they could sort of stand up and point to. And while it was interesting, it was one of those kind of conversations in the marketplace in which people were like, well, yeah, that's interesting and that's nice, but gosh, they're not going to catch up to the 200 features that Azure or AWS have. But it's a really interesting take, because if you think about just sort of pure market dynamics, while we talk a lot about, hey, these are all the features that are coming out of some product, some new product. It could be the new iPhone, it could be the new ChatGPT, it could be the new whatever it is. The reality is most companies and even most end user customers or most teams really only care about a few of them, right? They're looking, they have certain pain points, and those certain pain points are usually solved by one or two features, maybe three features, right? So, famously, the number that gets kicked around in our industry is that, maybe companies who use your technology or end users who use your technology might use 30% of the functionality of whatever it is you deliver, if that. But the challenge from a product management perspective or a product team perspective is, if you're trying to service a large market, you don't really know what that 30% is, right? If you knew, exactly what it was that fit into that 30%, well, you'd probably only build that. But the problem is you get feedback from the marketplace, or you are trying to compete in a marketplace, or you're trying to deliver things in a broader space, and you end up building the 100% of the capabilities that you build. But again, you're really like, well, I wish I knew what the 30% were, because I would focus more on those. And what we see sometimes, and I think is a great example of this Oracle kind of evolution, is they went from trying to build the 100% complete competable features with the Azures and Amazon, and AWSs and Azures and Googles of the world. But what they started to come to realize was, especially in the AWS case, those guys have taken their eye off the ball in terms of, being customer first around networks, around network pricing and around bare metal, and making those two things, right? The ability to get access to maybe faster hardware or hardware that you could get to in terms of real-time capabilities, whatever it was, and then not paying exorbitant prices for networking bandwidth, ingress and egress, and made that, went out and found a set of companies and customers and use cases in which those were their 30%. Those were their critical factors, right? And, I think as an industry, we sort of dismissed it to a certain extent, or at least we just sort of said, okay, well, that's fine, but they're not going to go, take on entire markets with just those couple of capabilities. So fast forward a little bit further, and we started to see them, like we said, win some deals. There was some questionable, considerations. I don't want to call them questionable, but there was some considerations for things like around TikTok, in which people wondered, well, how much of something like that, which is as much an interesting technology and a technology phenomenon and a cultural phenomenon around the world, but especially here in the United States, how much of that and the sort of evolution of what happened with TikTok, in which, at least in the United States, the U.S. government sort of said, well, we're concerned about how much the citizens of the United States are using TikTok. We're concerned about it being owned by a Chinese company. We're concerned about how much they're potentially influencing the actual content, and there became a lot of sort of political and technologies that got intertwined in the conversation. And so ultimately, the U.S. government sort of set down some laws and guidelines that said, hey, TikTok, we're going to potentially ban the technology from the United States unless it becomes at least 50-50 owned between the United States and something else. Now, I don't want to get into all the politics of it, but basically, like, that's a law that's on the books in the United States, and it's a law that is actively being not followed by the United States government. So they set a law, but they're not enforcing the law. And so, where it gets sort of interesting is you get into, how would they go about doing that? How would the United States go about sort of forcing TikTok to in essence, divest some portion of what they do, or give up some part of their company or their operations, whatever that might be, in order to comply with this U.S. law, which was concerned about, who had control and whether the control was influencing the content, and if that influence would, have some sort of negative ramification on, the psychology or the actions or the national security of the United States, right? So you can read up on all that. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Maybe I'll find some things in the show notes and so forth. But anyways, the reason I bring that up is one of the remedies that was discussed was that, how would the U.S. go about doing that? And Oracle Cloud kind of came into the picture, and Oracle, as well as their founder and head, Larry Ellison, had a very strong connection with the U.S. government, especially the Trump administration, and so there was some connections there between, like, well, okay, maybe TikTok U.S. should run their operations on Google or on Oracle Cloud, and the data should be maintained in Oracle Cloud. And there was there's a lot that goes on there and so forth. So so there was another part of that was sort of like, well, this sort of evolution or rising of Oracle Cloud maybe is just tied to the TikTok thing, and maybe the TikTok thing is just mostly political. And so again, in the broader cloud community, the question was really like, are these couple of little things in the Oracle Cloud going to be, are they just one-off things, or are they things that will lead to broader adoption because other people will go, oh, that looks like what we need to fit in our 30% of solving our problem. Anyways, so long story short, we've seen this evolution of Oracle Cloud, and so the new kind of conversation that's now happening with Oracle Cloud is, we were beginning to hear that they were, we've been hearing over the last couple of years, like, this sort of lower cost bandwidth, huge buying up of NVIDIA GPUs, and more focus around sort of bare metal offerings is becoming attractive to some number of AI startups and other types of things. And I think we've seen some of that, but again, that very much felt like a sort of almost like a co-location play, right? Like similar to what you might see with Equinix or with cloud, some of the other sort of GPU clouds, if you will. And so you were like, okay. And again, this is, and we haven't, at least on the Cloudcast, we haven't spent a lot of time really kind of focused on the purely GPU clouds, because again, a lot of that just felt like, as an extension or an evolution of sort of co-location. And the co-location markets, at least historically, have been interesting, but they've very much felt almost as much like a real estate play as much as they were some sort of a technology play. And so we didn't spend a lot of time covering them because, it just became sort of more the economics of real estate. Could you hold certain assets? Could you have some number of buildings? Now, we probably should have spent more time on that, because as we get into AI, being a real estate player, given the mass amounts of space and power and cooling and access to other sorts of electricity and so forth, are becoming as important as diving into the models or diving into the scalability of things, right? So that was sort of a blind spot or a mistake on our part, is thinking about what Oracle was doing as sort of a co-location play, and then continuing to sort of have in our mind that the co-location was just an extension of what we've seen from co-location in the past. And I think the co-location sort of AI rent a GPU type of market, whatever we want to call that, is a viable thing. It's a viable thing because the need for power cooling space is no longer just a commodity. In fact, it's going to become something that, especially if some of these AI projections continue out the way that people are talking about, and the amount of power that they need, is going to be something that people companies can legitimately differentiate on and legitimately change the market dynamics if they end up doing it properly. Now, there are lots of other factors involved, right? At least in the United States, there are still all kinds of challenges for, creating new sources of power. Can you use nuclear? Can you use other types of things? Where can you do it in a way that, aligns to, environmental laws and regulations and concerns? What are the trade-offs in the short term between power generation that's going to data centers versus power generation going to like the local cities and the requirements of citizens and all those sort of things. So there's a lot involved there, but I think in our case we've sort of made the mistake of not prioritizing digging into that as much as we should, again, because we sort of were like, well, this is just more computing. But I think it's, the more I think about it, it's different computing. So anyways, where does this all come back to Oracle? So in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the stock price of Oracle go way up, but we've seen the announcements from Oracle be very interesting in that they are actively announcing that they have, won like $300 to $400 billion worth of essentially AI hosting business, primarily from OpenAI, over the next 5 years, roughly. And and what that's done is it's driven their stock price way up. It's driven them their company valuation closer to $1 trillion. Eventually they're up basically a third in the last month because of this one announcement. And it sort of it gets us to a point where we have to think about it. We have to think about how we want to think about it. Do we think about this as, on one hand, you think about this and you go, okay, maybe this is the beginning of us needing to look at the ability of clouds / colos ability to deliver GPU services and maybe what that looks like on top of it. Because maybe it is just GPU services at scale as a sort of its own complete category that we should treat as thoroughly as we have cloud computing, the rise of public cloud computing, right? That's one way of looking at it, right? Is this really is not just the same thing with a different flavor to it, but really should be looked at one way. The other way to look at it is, well, what would that mean, right? What would a GPU-centric cloud look like, and the services that begin to pile on top of that? Because right now, a lot of times when we talk about these things, like we think about it and we go, well, there's GPUs, and then there's models like an LLM, and then there's some application like a ChatGPT, and we don't really talk about any other parts of the stack. We just sort of go, well, those are the three main components. What else is there, right? And I don't think we've spent enough time kind of going like, well, what else should you care about? What else will wrap around that? And again, part of that is because the experience has been, well, if you are an end user, you log in, you use ChatGPT, you don't really care where the GPUs are coming from. You don't really care about the model behind it. I mean, I guess you do, but you don't really get into being like, how is that load balanced? How are they, what are the firewall rules around that? And how are they doing, things to guardrail against hallucinations? And while we've talked about a lot of those things, like we haven't talked about them as like purely cloud services. We've talked to people who, kind of do bits and pieces and stuff like that. So it does make us sort of think about like, okay, maybe that's the place we get into. But again, now we're really talking about AI-centric stuff and not so much cloud stuff. But again, evolution, right? It's been 15 years we've been talking about this. The other part of the Oracle thing to sort of think about is you go, well, okay, the world, at least right this second, is sort of fascinated by, okay, Oracle apparently won this contract with OpenAI. And then the financial side of that is people are then going, yeah, but, where the yeah, but is them going, okay, OpenAI is promising you $300 million worth of business on top of whatever business they will continue to do with Microsoft, although there's some changes and things happening with Microsoft, on top of the Stargate project, on top of the things that they're doing with SoftBank, on top of them talking about building their own chips, because Oracle has massive, probably one of the largest number of NVIDIA chips, right? And you start to go, it feels like OpenAI for, even where they are today, which is somewhere allegedly in the $15 billion range in terms of revenue, if you were to, let's say it doubled every year from here until 2030. So that would be, 15 billion this year, 30 billion the next year, 60 billion the next year, 120 billion the next year, 240 billion the next year. That gets us out to roughly 2030. But they have a $300 million commitment to now, and that would be revenue. That wouldn't be profit, right? So you go, on one hand, you go, okay, that's doubling. Well, maybe if you triple, if they were going to triple every year, which again, we've never, I'm trying to think of the last time we saw a company that tripled every year for 5 years, especially on that sort of large number, which that would be nobody. That might get you to a point in which if they had a reasonable profitability model, they potentially could be paying out $300 billion of that to Oracle in order to host the service that they do. But you kind of go, that math in and of itself, just on its face value, given what we know about the, kind of the early days of this, or even just extrapolating to look like Google, those numbers don't add up. And so it puts us in an interesting situation of going, okay, the Oracle news is a thing, and maybe it gets us talking about what Oracle is doing that's new and unique, and we need to dig into that. At the same time, it does make us sort of think like, okay, maybe there is an entirely new sort of aspect of this that is sort of the new intersection of what quote unquote cloud computing or co-location or some new word needs to look like. And Oracle happens to be kind of at the beginning of that. Will they be the leaders in that? Who knows? But maybe we need to dig into that some more. But again, it gets in the question of like, well, do we keep thinking about that as cloud computing, or do you think about it as AI? I don't know. But I'm trying to think about this and extrapolate this into bigger things, because it does feel like on one hand, it is the beginning of something different, an evolution of a few different things that we've sort of touched on and covered, and whether, again, cloud or co-location or beginning of AI or GPU as a service, whatever that might be. But it also feels like a lot of overinflation of things that if you just add up the math and you add up the commitments, the alleged commitments, in a lot of ways you go, this doesn't add up. This doesn't add up. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, this is as much novelty and bluster and overcommitment, in certain things that we've seen in the past as anything, right? So, I think the Oracle stuff is going to be interesting to watch. I think it's going to be interesting to to dive a level deeper than just people being fascinated with, Larry Ellison is now, the richest man in the world on paper, and people are fascinated with that concept all the time, who's the richest person in the world, and then dive a little bit deeper into being like, well, what does this really mean, right? Like, why did the stock market not have a more pragmatic approach to, Oracle announcing these massive numbers, which were tied to one company, which the numbers don't really make sense. But they rocketed up. So, is this the beginning of Oracle becoming a meme stock? I don't know, right? I'm not speculating upon that, but that's the sort of behavior that we're seeing around this, right? So it's weird. It feels like this sort of one kind of announcement. On one hand, you can look at it very superficially and go, wow, big numbers and big personalities and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. We're trying to look at it as like, is this the beginning of like 5 or 6 different kind of areas that we should dig into more because, they have some very interesting other ramifications, right? Just a couple of them being, well, for one, if you are an Oracle customer, and you're doing the SaaS service, like, you might want to be asking the question, like, how much of how much attention will you be paying to the rest of that business if you now think that, the cash cow business is this $300 billion thing, right? Given that right now the business of Oracle Cloud is something like $14 billion, right? So, you have to ask those sort of questions. You might ask the question of, if you are Microsoft, for example, and you are now sort of unburdened from becoming the primary place where OpenAI trains their models, what sort of CapEx does that free up for you to go do? What sort of new things could you potentially do? Given that you still have access to their models and you can still serve them through inference, but you don't have to be burdened with, providing them, essentially sort of almost free GPUs or credits for GPUs, but you can still provide your Copilot services or some new set of things. What does that mean for Microsoft? Does that unlock and open up a whole bunch of new things for them because they're not burdened with the sort of least efficient use of GPU, the least profitable part of GPUs and so forth. And so it feels like there are maybe a half dozen or 10 other sort of ramification questions that if this is a direction that both OpenAI is going, but Oracle is going, but then there are sort of downstream ripples that happen. So it's actually from this one sort of kind of announcement, which on one hand does feel very just noise and bluster more than reality. It does feel like there are potentially though multiple sort of interesting reality-based and reality angles to go dig into, and so that's something that we're going to be doing. And again, I come back to is this a cloud thing? Is this an AI thing? I think it's going to become harder and harder to sort of separate the two of those things, going forward. But this does maybe feel like the beginning of something that we'll look back on and go, oh, okay, it was a distinctive point in time in which we started to think about things differently, and the path at which people went forward began to move differently. So that old I forget what it's called, but I came to a fork in the road and I took the road, the path less traveled. Maybe that's where we are at this point in the sort of intersection or the Venn diagram of cloud and AI. So anyways, with that, I took a headline. I rambled about it for 30 minutes, apologizing for the ramble, but I have been thinking about this over the last couple of weeks and just like, well, what more does this mean than just us having to see Larry Ellison's face and him being, at least for some temporary or maybe permanent, who knows, moment in time, the richest man on Earth. So congratulations to him for what could be a day or a week or could be till the rest of his time. Who knows? But anyways, I think that's the least interesting part of this story. Anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.